Today we're talking about some of the possibilities of what the wise men or the Magi could have possibly seen in the sky that would made them pack up their bags, travel thousands of miles with valuable gifts straight to the Judean king and ask, "Where is the newborn king?" So these aren't just tourists. These are not just guys making some random trip. They had to see something not only significant in the sky, but highly symbolic to get them to pack up and head out to Jerusalem. I mean, their gifts alone show their intentions. So, what could they have possibly seen in the sky that would make them so sure that the Messiah was born? Let's start with the criteria in Matthew. Some key phrases we must account for. Says, "We saw his star." They say they saw it in the east. Now, whether that means they were in the east when they saw his star or they saw it rising in the east, we're not too sure. But since most stars rise in the east and set in the west with the rotation of the earth, I think it most likely meant that they saw it when they were in the east. After they talked to Herod, it says the star went before them and it came to rest over the place where the child was. It doesn't actually say that the star guided them all the way to Jerusalem. We just hear that they show up, they talk about seeing it, and then when they head out to Bethlehem, that it went before them. So this wasn't just some guy looking up at the stars and saying, "Oh, that's pretty neat." No, this is like emergency flashing in the sky. Whatever they saw, hey, the Messiah is born. And it must have been significant enough for them to put so much confidence in such a big trip. I mean, this isn't traveling over to your neighbor's house to see, hey, is the baby born yet? No, this is, they see something and they're confident. They're so confident they pack up, they get the gifts, thousands of miles straight into Herod's palace. Now, let's frame how they would have interpreted or seen the sky in their day, because there are a couple of differences. So back in their time, any point of light in the sky would be considered a star. So even planets or supernovas, any point of light. But they did make some distinctions. So you have your standard stars which are kind of fixed in one place. And then you have planets. So to them, planets would be wandering stars since they're not fixed in those constellations. And these wandering stars carried very symbolic roles. And then there were things that they would read as omens versus these kind of signs. Like comets, they'd interpret those as like chaos or judgment. Eclipses meant warning or disruption. And planetary behavior, these wandering stars to them, represents authority and timing and kingship. Now the Magi were not just like amateurs. They're not like your TikTok astrologist. They're more like NASA scientists with religious background. They used the stars as a way to interpret, define kingships, and pair that with prophecy, especially Daniel's prophecy of the coming Messiah. And you have the recipe for these scholars to be looking at the skies, awaiting the coming Messiah. And when the skies start to show a symbolic rhyming of the King of Kings being born, you could see why they'd pack up and head out. I mean, they had centuries of Babylonian and Persian observation, mathematical tables, record cycles, pattern recognition. I mean, anywhere in the world at this time, this is the best place to be for studying the patterns of the stars. So not just some bright light in the sky is going to get them to pack up and leave. It's got to be something symbolic, something rare, something that the people that look at the skies, that they would find very symbolic. So these guys could tell the difference between noise and signal. So now that we have established that, what could they have possibly have seen? Now, obviously, I'm not discounting that maybe what they saw was purely supernatural. It's not something that's recorded or an astronomical event. But the fact that they studied and looked at the stars, I see no reason not to look at astronomical records and see if there's something that aligns with what Matthew is saying, something that's highly symbolic and could potentially fit the criteria. And I think you're going to like one of the things that lines up very beautifully. And if it just happens to be what the Magi saw, it adds another level of depth to Christmas Day itself. Now, looking at astronomical events from like 10 BC all the way to 1 BC and seeing what fits best, of course, a lot of people say novas and supernovas. Now, one thing to note, unlike planets, because a nova just kind of stays affixed in the constellation. Now, there were some possible novas that were recorded in 5 BC and 4 BC. So that fits an earlier birthday of Christ, like we covered in the other video. But the problem with this, I guess it could be symbolic if it happened in a certain constellation, but it can't really go before them. It can't really move. It's affixed because we're talking about a far off star, not a planet in orbit. So that kind of makes it hard to fit all the criteria that Matthew outlines. Now, what about comets? Like Halley's Comet passed close by in 12 BC. Now, there are some problems with that. Comets are universally accepted in their time as bad omens, symbolize death, not birth, and it doesn't have the kind of directional behavior we need to fit Matthew. If a comet announced that you're going to be king, you'd start building bunkers, not loading up gold. That's because a comet to them was bad juju, for lack of better words. So that leads me closer to believe that if they saw something, then what most likely makes sense would be what they would call a wandering star or a planet. Because these events were highly symbolic, they could move irregularly, just how the cycles of orbits happen. Now, there are some planetary events that almost work, but not quite. Now, for example, Venus events represent beauty and fertility, but lacks authority symbolism. Mars events represent wars and bloodshed. Mercury events represent messengers or commerce. So they're interesting planets, but the wrong symbolism. And that leaves Jupiter and Saturn. Now, there was a Jupiter-Saturn triple conjunction in 7 BC. Now, to explain what this is, what conjunction means when they intersect to our view in the sky. Triple conjunction is even more rare because that means intersecting each other 3 times. Now, that is something definitely worth noting. Now, in 7 BC, this Jupiter-Saturn triple conjunction happens, and it happens in Pisces. So it is extremely rare, and it signals an era change. Now, that works okay for an earlier 6 or 5 BC birthday for Christ, but not so much for a later birthday like the 3 or 2 BC models. But it's definitely an event that would definitely capture attention and say, what that represents is some kind of big shift is happening. So Jupiter is basically the king planet, the crowning planet, and a conjunction with Saturn could be interpreted as a change in authority or a large change coming. So it would be a great sign to precede Christ's birth, but not necessarily exactly something that would announce it. Think of it like thunder in the distance. Now, let's talk about Jupiter real quick. So Jupiter to the Romans represents the king of gods. In Greece, it represents Zeus. Jupiter has a 12-year cycle, so it completes the zodiac loop every 12 years. So if planets wore jerseys, Jupiter's would say captain. Now that brings us to a highly symbolic event that happens in 3 to 2 BC. And this is where the symbolism really gets meaningful. So there's a triple crowning event in 3 and 2 BC. So what that basically means is Jupiter is crossing over the star Regulus, basically the little king, and it's doing it 3 times. Not only once, but 3 times. And this is highly symbolic because this iteration of 3 basically represents like the most. It's like saying the holy, holy of holy. A triple conjunction of a king planet is basically saying a king of kings. So it begins September of 3 BC, and it repeats over the process of several months, this triple conjunction. So crosses over the star Regulus all the way to May of 2 BC. And not only is the king planet, Jupiter, crowning the king star Regulus, but it's happening in the king constellation of Leo, which is a strong symbolism for Judah. So this is definitely not subtle. A triple conjunction of the king planet, of the king star in the constellation of Leo. Now you can see how that could easily be interpreted as a king of kings is being born in the tribe of Judah. And if you have prophecies that are talking about the coming Messiah will be born through the lineage of David, and it's lining up with the timing of Daniel's prophecy right in the same time frame, that I think is something definitely that you're packing your bags and this is the moment you've been waiting for, and you're pretty darn confident and you're heading out to Jerusalem. So it's very symbolically obvious. It's repeated over months. There's time to prepare a caravan. This wasn't a text notification. It was a calendar event you couldn't ignore. Now, obviously, that does require a later birthday of Jesus, a 3 or 2 BC birthday, for those things to be meaningful. Otherwise, it happens too late. A previous video, we talked about the birth of Christ, because there's 2 lines of thoughts. One that he was born around 6 or 5 BC, and another where he was born around 3 or 2 BC. If he was born around 3 or 2 BC, this symbolic astronomical event lines up very perfectly, especially with lots of the timing, because the event starts in 3 BC and does this triple conjunction over the course of several months. The Magi would see this, they'd pack up, travel, it'd take them several months, they get to Jerusalem, talk to King Herod, and then they go down to Bethlehem and present the gifts to Jesus. Now, this is why I think this is very highly symbolic, because there's another event that Jupiter does that ties it all in to the possible wording of Matthew. So December 25th, 2 BC, Jupiter appears to stop. It goes into retrograde. From Jerusalem, it would appear southward. And this retrograde means basically it appears to stop in the sky. Now, if the wise men were following this and Jupiter was his star, after all, it's the king planet.
I like it because it's like the king of planets.
It's the crowning planet. So if there's one star up there that we could refer to as his star, definitely it would be this one. And after they talk to Herod, then they go down to Bethlehem. If they happen to be making that in late December, and then they have Jupiter now is standing in the south sky and appears above Bethlehem. And Matthew notes that it stood in place. That's why this retrograde fits very beautifully, because, you know, when it goes in retrograde, it appears to stand in place. So just a crucial clarification. Retrograde does not wobble randomly. It appears fixed against the sky for days, easily interpreted as standing. And this is why I think this fits Matthew's language versus all the other events. And if they were traveling to Bethlehem during this retrograde, it would appear to them as stopped in the sky, and it's in the correct position. So at this point, Jupiter is not just a good candidate, it's beating out the competition, in my opinion, just because it matches that movement in Matthew and creates this very highly symbolic event that the Magi could easily interpret. And it's a very clear interpretation if you take into account these symbols. Now, once again, God could do something miraculous, and, you know, I could be wrong. There's not really any way to prove that Jupiter was the star. And then it also does rely on a 3 or 2 BC model for Christ to be born. But that's something I explained in an earlier video. But if God wanted someone who studies the stars to notice something, I don't see anything else that has this much symbolism that lines up perfectly with the Messiah being born. So out of all known phenomena between 10 BC and 1 BC, only Jupiter consistently says king, behaves directionally, repeats its message, allows travel time, fits Matthew's language, and culminates exactly where the child is if we take into account that retrograde. I mean, if that's the case, that is so cool, because that just adds huge meaning to Christmas. I mean, Christmas is the day we recognize Christ. It's the day we give gifts, and, you know, perhaps December 25th was the day that the Magi gave their gifts to Christ. And perhaps Jupiter is Christ's star. I found it interesting that Jupiter is in a 12-year cycle, and obviously the number 12 has many symbolisms tied to Christ. 12 apostles, for example. So we've talked about possible birthdays of Christ, and that could possibly help us understand as to what the Magi may have seen. We talked about who were the Magi, their origins, why were they even looking at the stars, and their connections to Daniel and his prophecies. If they start to see the symbolism in the sky that starts rhyming with the prophecies of the coming Messiah, that would explain why they packed up and traveled thousands of miles to present these gifts. And then we just talked about, some possible symbolic astronomy things going on that could possibly work. But next video, we're going to talk about the gifts, the symbolism behind them. There's lots of symbolism. And the fact that these were the gifts that they brought further strengthens their case for not just being random travelers, but people that were awaiting this, people that knew. They knew that this was not just a king, this was the King of Kings. This was the Messiah.